Welcome to Veronica Live. I'm Veronica, and I'm here today with Tracy, my co-host. And you just heard President Bush, and can you believe that that was 16 years ago? So today we wanted to talk about 9/11, and where were you? You know, so Tracy, where were you on 9/11?
I was dropping off my son at daycare. And I was about to go into work, and I worked at the base, of course. And a young lady came in, the young airman, and she said, "Hey, have you heard that an airplane hit the World Trade Center?" And I said to her, "Oh, wow, I hadn't heard that. That sounds like a terrorist attack." But the thing I thought it was a very small aircraft. I had no idea at that point that it was actually a commercial airliner. So I quickly went to work, and of course it was on all the television sets and just blaring everywhere. And we were all kind of transfixed and watching it on television. And then of course the second one hit, and then the Pentagon was hit.
Yeah. I was in Vegas, and I wasn't working that day, and I remember my brother called and was like, turn on the TV, and I was, what? And then that was it. I was glued the rest of the day in shock. I had my son there and daughter, and we just, kind of stayed there that day. So I did ask my son yesterday, he's 23, and I said, what do you remember from that day? Did you realize it was terrorism? And he reflected that I was really worried because my husband was TDY and I couldn't get a hold of him, and it was so chaotic because so many places had been hit at that point, and you just didn't know, was it going to continue? So it was so scary that day, so scary.
I ended up that day, they sent a lot of us home because they closed the daycare center, and so I had to run and pick my son up. Then I had to get off the base, and then I had to get home. I didn't have a mission critical job at that moment. I had just gotten here to this base, so I'd only been there 2 days. But I went home, and of course I was watching the television, and I remember, because my husband was TDY as well, I remember hearing the airplanes fly overhead because, we have Cheyenne Mountain here, and they were flying the cat patrols, protecting them, and I could hear it at night.
Yeah, it was so scary. And then, the stories. I mean, we lost almost 3,000 people, Americans, unheard of. We haven't had a terror attack like that since Pearl Harbor. To use airplanes as missiles, amazing. And then for me that day,
unheard of then too.
Many of my friends had left the military and were flying actually for United and American, and including my brother-in-law that day. So I just remember making these phone calls, trying to call people to make sure their husband was okay or my brother-in-law was okay. And I remember my friend told me that that she had 100 messages on her answering machine with people worried about where her husband was that day. Checking in.
Yeah.
So fortunately, they were all okay.
Oh, go ahead.
They were all fine.
Yes, thank goodness. I know. We were lucky too. We had many acquaintances because John is from New York City, and he knew several people that worked in the World Trade Center. One particular was his cousin, who, generally speaking, would go. There's a little Catholic church nearby, so every day on the way to work, he would stop and light a candle, and then go to work. This particular day was running late, so he thought, well, I'm not going to stop. I don't have time. And then he decided, no, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. He went and stopped and lit a candle, and he came out and saw the first airplane hit. So lighting a candle that day saved him from being in the building at that point.
That's so amazing. And I heard Vice President Dick Cheney speak 2 years ago, and he actually tells the story about how he had to make the decision to shoot down the airplane, the one that was headed, they thought, to the Capitol. So he what a hard decision to make, because now you're going to kill people, but you're saving people. And the officer that came in after he told him that, yes, go ahead, I authorize this, came back in and was like, sir, are you sure? And he said, yes, I'm sure. So you kind of got goosebumps when you heard that story. And then on another interesting note, the DC Air National Guard launched 2 F-16s that day, and all they had on on the F-16s were bullets, and fighter jets only carry about 100 plus bullets, which is about 9 seconds worth of shooting at something. So it was actually the commander and a female lieutenant who was a brand new pilot, and they called it a kamikaze mission. They were actually going to run into the airplane and do whatever it took to get it out of the sky to save people. So again, more people having to make decisions. It ended up not happening because, the passengers on that flight tried to take it over. It ended up crashing in Pennsylvania.
They fought back.
But wow, what hardcore.
I can't even imagine having that responsibility and knowing that you're getting in that airplane to possibly not come back.
Right, because that's not how our pilots are wired. Yeah, our pilots aren't wired that way today. They go and they shoot missiles and bullets.
Right.
But I mean, 16 years ago, honestly, it feels like yesterday to me, today when they were showing footage throughout the day. And then Trump had an awesome statement today. He and Melania were at the Pentagon for memorial, and he said, "No force on earth can ever take away your memories, diminish your love, or break your will to endure and carry on." So, it's not over, and we're still fighting these terrorists. That day changed our life forever. Things,
it did.
We're still fighting these
nothing
people.
We do is ever the same, because of that. How we travel, how we get on an airplane.
Yep. And then I loved Secretary Mattis, of course, opened before President Trump, and he said, such a Mattis, he's such a mad dog. "We are not cotton candy, and we're not intimidated by our enemies. Your military does not scare." So...
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, and he's like, again, both Trump and Mattis, were like, we're never going to forget these people, and we're continuing the fight because this, wasn't an accident. And just a little side note, today also is the 5th year anniversary of Benghazi. When Ambassador Christopher Stevens was killed, and 2 CIA officers and 2 others that were there. So, it's still there. That was 5 years ago. This is 16 years ago. It's just...
And we're going to be fighting this terrorism threat for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I have to say, I visited the New York the memorial. It's absolutely breathtaking. They have all the names around this water feature there. It's moving. I remember I went and found Todd Beamer, who was the one also on the Pennsylvania flight that said, let's roll, trying to take out the terrorist, which was interesting too. I read about the terrorists, and they had about 5 per airplane. Of course, one was the pilot, and they used knives and box cutters, which again, anybody that had ever taken over a flight, it was because they were trying to get to a country, not to use an airplane as a missile.
Right. Gosh.
So
it's a sobering day. The kids at school today were interested in hearing a little bit more about it because they were all so young. Most of them were maybe 1 or 2 years old, the high school students that I work with.
Right.
So they were all, interested in hearing a little bit more about it. So we talked a little bit about it in some of our classes, not from a political point of view, but just, from a remembering people point of view.
Right. Well, so many gave so much. They say 1,000 first responders in New York have died from cancer, from cleaning up that area, and then also there was about 6,000 people that were wounded too that day in New York City. So many people.
Well, you remember the pictures of people walking out covered with ash.
Yeah.
I know. There's a very famous one of a lady. She just recently passed away from cancer. From whatever she was inhaling that day.
Right. Well,
unfortunately, it wasn't just the people that were in the buildings themselves. It was all kinds of people around.
Today, also, Vice President Trump was doing the ceremony in Pennsylvania, and so tonight on the news they showed the clips from that, and he was visibly moved. I mean, he talked about how that night, he was able to go home to his small family, and that this was personal to him. And he's so grateful to our nation, what these people did. They stepped forward, and of course, he said they had courage and they were selfless. They gave all that day, So
yes, yes.
But he was visibly moved. He was in tears, actually.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I saw that. He did have tears in his eyes.
Well, and
I don't think you can hear that story though about that airplane without feeling a sense of pride in those people.
Right.
They weren't military people. But they fought back, trying to do what they could to not only save themselves but to save whoever else was the target.
Right. Well, it's again 16 years ago. It feels like yesterday. I did work the next day. I put on my Air Force uniform, and I remember it took about 2 hours to get onto that base that day. But again, there was no flights in the country, and
right.
And everybody, wherever they were, there was still so much. Everybody was still nervous, and what's going on? Is somebody going to attack again? Because we've never been hit like that, in our country. So,
right.
I was happy to be.
It was
wearing
such an
the uniform
unconventional.
that day.
Yeah, it was such an unconventional attack. Wasn't something we saw coming. So, yeah, I didn't. The funny part for me was I was still active duty at that time. I did not go to work the next day because I was still considered not mission essential.
Okay.
Due to the place I worked. So it was about 3 days before I actually went back to work. And, of course, as you said, difficult to get on the base because everything changed.
Right. Well, I was doing, public affairs, so of course the media was calling nonstop. What's your posture? What's going on? What's the base doing? Why is it taking so long? To get on for the workers, and there was just a lot of chaos. But we came through it. I think our nation now is stronger. So
definitely.
Unfortunately,
and I don't think anybody's forgotten.
No, and we still have a threat that exists out there. So even though we haven't had an incident like this happen at that level, the threat still exists. And Americans need to remember that. As we take our shoes off and take our laptop off to go through the screening at the airport,
right.
That changes forever too. And these are little freedoms that we lost because of these people. But we have to be proactive,
vigilant
and vigilant.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just have to say I'm thankful for our nation, and today I think President Trump and Vice President Pence, they were there showing how much they were impacted by it, and again, how great these people were. They didn't choose this to happen to them.
No, they certainly didn't. But I am glad for the people that have chosen since that day to join the military as well.
Yes.
And help fight back against this type of threat.
And the amazing first responders that gave all.
Oh, goodness, yeah, we have to mention that.
And so many people were moved by it that they did join the military, to go take action. Mm-hmm. The one I always think of is that Pat Tillerman that was a pro football player that joined the Army because he was moved by it. It definitely impacted lots of people. And I want to, send our hearts and prayers out to those families today that still have to deal with this and miss their loved ones. So, Tracy, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just, I'm proud to be an American as well. Proud that, I served and helped during this time, and I hope our young people continue to do as well.
Great. Well, we thank everyone for joining our special edition of a 911 Remembrance today. And again, we pray for those families, and God bless America. Thank you.